Bueno, vamos a comenzar rápidamente. Buenas tardes aquí, buenos días en América. Yo soy Joan Caylà, de la Fundación de la Unidad de Investigación de Tuberculosis de Barcelona, y voy a moderar esta mesa con la doctora Virginia Pomar, que trabaja en el Servicio de Enfermedades Infecciosas del Hospital de Sant Pau y también está en la Unidad Clínica de Tuberculosis de este hospital. La mesa es sobre estrategias para mejorar el control de la tuberculosis y cada ponente va a disponer de un máximo de 20 minutos y después de cada ponencia pasaremos a la discusión. La doctora Virginia Pomar iniciará la presentación de los ponentes.
Buenas tardes o buenos días, de momento nosotros. Empezará con nosotros Mario Bravo Masferrer, un ingeniero de sistemas biológicos que está ahora en Serveis Clínics, y nos presentará la efectividad de un centro de referencia para el tratamiento de poblaciones vulnerables con tuberculosis en Cataluña. Adelante, Mario.
Vale, se oye bien. Muchas gracias por la presentación. Quería agradecer a la Fundación y dar las gracias a todos los que estáis aquí y bueno, a toda la gente que ha hecho posible que pueda estar yo aquí hoy. Y nada, os vengo a hablar hoy de servicios clínicos. Servicios clínicos como una pieza dentro del programa de tuberculosis dentro de Cataluña y el efecto que tiene y por qué, desde mi punto de vista como analista y lo que he visto a través de los datos, me ha hecho ver de que es un centro que es casi necesario, es útil, con una utilidad muy grande, ¿vale? Ahora, bueno, para hacernos una idea, lo que voy a hablar, primero un poco de contexto, un poco qué es servicios clínicos, seguido de la situación interna. Cuando hablo de situación interna me refiero a dentro de la clínica qué perfil de paciente hay, qué características tiene, y luego la habilidad del centro, es decir, teniendo en cuenta las características de los pacientes y sus situaciones vitales, a cómo el centro es capaz de resolver estas dificultades y tratar este tipo de pacientes. Luego, la situación externa básicamente es el marco contextual, es decir, dentro de la ciudad de Barcelona y dentro de Cataluña, qué tipo de pacientes hay y cómo la presencia de este centro pues, tiene un efecto considerable. Vale. Bueno, servicios clínicos, para los que no lo conozcáis, es un centro que se estableció en 1993 en respuesta a la declaración de la OMS de la tuberculosis como emergencia de salud global. Y servicios clínicos se especializó desde el principio en tratar personas complejas. Entonces, cuando hablamos de personas complejas, el término complejo es como muy variado y me refiero a complejidades desde la parte clínica, complejidad clínica como podría ser un paciente multiresistente o con una tuberculosis diseminada, hasta lo que podría ser una complejidad social por situaciones y características exclusivas de ese paciente que dificulta de alguna manera o imposibilita el correcto tratamiento de la tuberculosis sin algún tipo de soporte asistencial. Entonces, este es el trabajo que realiza Servicios Clínicos y es el que se ha especializado en los últimos 30 años y ha ido mejorando y adaptándose a los cambios que la epidemiología ha ido presentando. Básicamente, Servicios Clínicos recibe pacientes de toda Cataluña. Este mapa que veis aquí básicamente muestra la distribución de casos en toda Cataluña, no de servicios clínicos, sino de la tuberculosis en Cataluña, y estos son los porcentajes, cómo está distribuido. Lo pongo aquí porque Servicios Clínicos recibe sobre todo pacientes de Barcelona y Lérida, ¿vale? De zona de Barcelona y Lérida, llegando a porcentajes bastante más elevados que los que presentamos aquí, es decir, su principal flujo es de estas dos regiones sanitarias. Entonces, cuando hablamos de situación interna, básicamente lo que vemos en servicios clínicos es un reflejo de la complejidad que se va presentando dentro de Cataluña. Es decir, el centro es un punto de contingencia para la complejidad, es decir, los pacientes que son complejos dentro de Cataluña tienen acceso a este centro y a recibir un tratamiento especializado, centrado y que recibe unos resultados más adecuados. Esta complejidad es una complejidad cambiante, ¿vale? Entonces, todos los pacientes han ido mostrando pues, esta evolución acorde con la evolución de las características de los pacientes en Cataluña. Como vemos aquí, primero la edad, la mediana de edad se ha mantenido bastante constante, la global, sobre todo, y cada vez, como podemos ver, se acerca más a la que es alóctona, los pacientes nacidos fuera del Estado, y esto en gran parte se debe al gran aumento de población alóctona. Como podemos ver, el porcentaje ha pasado dentro de la clínica de un 10% hasta superar valores del 80%. Bueno, esto no es exactamente lo que vemos en Cataluña, pero es un reflejo, es la evolución, el pattern, el proceso es muy parecido. A nivel de sexo, en masculino-femenino, vemos que la proporción es dominantemente masculina y que no tiene ningún tipo de efecto a través de lo que es la proporción de inmigrantes o de población alóctona y autóctona. A nivel de comorbilidades, vemos, como era de esperar y como es una buena noticia, esta reducción en pacientes de VIH, pacientes con hepatitis C, y esto evidentemente va acorde con la reducción de la pandemia, la introducción de los tratamientos antirretrovirales, etc. Sin embargo, seguimos con valores bastante elevados. Y a nivel de programa de tuberculosis en Barcelona, los porcentajes, las prevalencias de VIH rondan el 5 o 7% más o menos. Aquí podemos ver que en servicios clínicos seguimos en un 12%, siguen siendo valores elevados, como es de esperar de un centro que es básicamente un punto de contingencia de complejidad. No esperaríamos otra cosa. Esta variable, la precariedad social, es una variable importante que ha sufrido un aumento considerable a lo largo de los años, y es importante, y la destaco, y lo veremos más adelante porque la destaco, pero porque es una variable muy determinante a la hora de cómo el paciente se cura, cómo el tratamiento que recibe y el resultado del tratamiento. Inmigrante reciente lo definimos como lo define los informes de tuberculosis de Catalunya, que básicamente es un paciente inmigrado reciente, es decir, que ha llegado al país y emigrado reciente en menos de 5 años, y que es sin techo o sin domicilio fijo. Básicamente, sin techo es una persona que vive en la calle y sin domicilio fijo es una persona que no tiene una casa, un habitáculo fijo, pero sí que puede dormir en hostales, en albergues, etc. Como podéis ver, los valores, las proporciones dentro de la clínica son muy elevadas. Aquí estamos hablando del 60% en los últimos años de gente con precariedad social. A nivel de hábitos tóxicos, sobre todo lo que es el tabaco, y aquí a IDU me refiero a uso de drogas ilícitas, no intravenosas, perdonad por los que estéis acostumbrados así, pero vemos que se ha mantenido bastante constante en los últimos 20 años, y el tabaco es lo único que ha reducido un poco, pero si os fijáis seguimos teniendo valores muy elevados, 60% de personas fumadoras, personas con elevado consumo de alcohol entre el 40 y el 50%, y usuarios de drogas casi el 30% en los últimos años. Son valores bastante elevados. A nivel de qué tipos de drogas se consumen, principalmente los opiáceos, como era de esperar, ha reducido. Vemos que los opiáceos ha bajado considerablemente y ha cambiado simplemente el perfil, el tipo de droga que se consume es distinto, ¿no? Ahora vemos un cierto aumento en la cocaína, no es significativo en todo caso, podríamos decir que es horizontal, pero sí que hay un aumento en el cannabis. A nivel de consumo de alcohol y consumo de tabaco, medido en unidades de bebida estándar por semana en alcohol y paquetes año en tabaco, vemos que las han bajado un poco, es decir, todo y que se mantenga constante la prevalencia, el consumo de alcohol es un poco más bajo, y el tabaco, que si recordáis bajaba un poco, el consumo aumenta, es decir, que cada vez hay menos fumadores, pero fuman más. ¿Vale? Entonces, ¿qué hay en servicios clínicos? Así como hemos visto que es un perfil cambiante, que va evolucionando y tenemos una complejidad que no siempre es la misma. Pero en los últimos 5 años, ¿qué tenemos? Aquí esta es como una imagen de los últimos 5 años y son básicamente las prevalencias que tenemos, ¿no? Si veis, pues VIH, diabetes, es todo lo que hemos comentado, pero un poco resumido, plasmado. Vale, entonces, la habilidad del centro, es decir, vale, servicios clínicos es un punto de contingencia, tiene este tipo de perfil de paciente, pero ¿cómo los trata? ¿Qué resultados obtiene cuando este tipo de pacientes ingresa? Entonces, La manera más directa o rápida que podemos analizar o responder a esta pregunta sería: ¿los pacientes se curan o no se curan? Y esto es lo primero que miramos, ¿no? Vale, se curan y vemos que hay un aumento a lo largo de los años, desde finales del siglo XX hasta ahora, llegando a valores de por encima del 90% de curación. Y aquí hay una bajada en mortalidad muy relacionada, vemos el coeficiente de correlación de 0,84 con VIH, ¿no? Como era de esperar. Básicamente, los pacientes que se morían dentro de la clínica eran pacientes que estaban en un estado muy deteriorado con VIH y con SIDA. En todo caso, si os fijáis, la pérdida se mantiene bastante constante a lo largo del tiempo. O sea, hay un 8% que siempre está allí, y que el perfil vaya cambiando, la complejidad vaya aumentando, la complejidad social, si os fijáis, la precariedad social ha aumentado, ha ido cambiando, esta parte se mantiene, estos perdidos se mantienen constantes. Entonces, una de las preguntas que queríamos responder y que intentamos buscar cuando hacemos investigación con los datos de servicios clínicos es: ¿podemos detectar algunas características comunes en pacientes perdidos o en pacientes muertos que nos hagan ver que hay una falta de capacidad de tratar con este tipo de características? Es decir, por ejemplo, la precariedad social, si muestra asociación significativa con los pacientes perdidos, podríamos pensar directamente que servicios clínicos no tienen una gran capacidad para tratar a esta precariedad social. Entonces, la hipótesis es ¿existen algunas características que muestren esto o no? Esta es la primera hipótesis, sobre todo para los pacientes perdidos, ya que la mortalidad es prácticamente irrisoria, y entonces a nivel estadístico no tenemos suficiente poder para hacer el análisis. Para explicaros esto y para enseñároslo, cómo resolvimos esto, voy a usar lo que se llama MCA, que es análisis de correspondencia múltiple. Da igual el nombre, si es... básicamente lo que quiero que entendáis, estos son elipses de confianza. Estas elipses incluyen todas las características de los pacientes de estos grupos. Es decir, los pacientes perdidos tienen un cierto número de características que los definen. Esta elipse representa este conjunto de características. Si las elipses se solapan, las características no son diferentes entre los pacientes de cada grupo. Si no se solapan, como es este caso, los pacientes muestran diferencias significativas entre ellos y hay características que los diferencian. ¿Qué características? Aquí, si os fijáis, estamos hablando del año 2000 a 2010, primera década, todavía había mortalidad. ¿Qué pasa? Aquí vemos que no se solapan ninguna de las elipses, por lo tanto los grupos son distintos entre ellos, y las principales características son: en el grupo de éxitos, que es el más alejado de todos, es el VIH con SIDA, con una ratio ajustada de 3.9. Básicamente, esto lo que quiere decir es que los pacientes que tenían esta condición morían mucho más que los que no. Y los curados respecto a los perdidos, es decir, la gente que se perdía, la principal característica era el uso de drogas ilícitas, con un valor más bajo de una ratio ajustada, pero sigue siendo significativa. ¿Vale? Entonces, esto era la situación a principios de la primera década. Y ¿cómo ha evolucionado servicios clínicos? ¿Vale? El mismo análisis con las mismas características, realizándolo exactamente lo mismo estadísticamente, vemos cómo estas elipses ya se solapan. Es decir, las características de los pacientes ya no son significativamente distintas. ¿Esto qué quiere decir? Que ya no hay características que sean exclusivas de un perdido o de un exitus. Es decir, no hay ninguna característica que servicios clínicos no esté tratando correctamente, que no esté identificando y que tenga un problema con esa característica. Entonces, esto que soporta la hipótesis de lo que hace que los pacientes se pierdan son características intrínsecas, son situaciones vitales concretas que hacen que no permiten que este paciente se mantenga controlado en el sentido de, registrado, y que continúe el tratamiento como está haciendo en servicios clínicos. Entonces, básicamente este es el resultado de este solapamiento en los últimos 10 años, y vemos que lo que decía ahora mismo, no hay ratios significativas, es decir, no vemos estas diferencias significativas entre los grupos de pacientes. ¿Qué podría llevar a esta pérdida? Aquí es donde servicios clínicos lo que hace es, intentamos buscar nuevas razones que puedan ser causa o que puedan explicar esta pérdida de estos pacientes. Al final es un 8% que está allí y la idea es encontrar razones para que esta pérdida disminuya, ¿no? y aumentar la tasa de curación. Un estudio, y aquí doy gracias a la doctora Altet por su inmenso trabajo, básicamente hizo todo un retrospectivo para encontrar datos de trastorno de salud mental, enfermedades de salud mental, básicamente, y vimos, son curvas de Kaplan-Meier que básicamente nos enseñan cómo las personas con trastorno de salud mental, su supervivencia a la pérdida, es decir, su riesgo a pérdida es mucho más elevado. Servicios clínicos incluye pues, un equipo de psicología y psiquiatría, para ir tratando con todos estos cambios en la complejidad, ¿no? Entonces, ahora, ¿por qué creemos que es necesario servicios clínicos dentro del programa? Esta gráfica de aquí es la misma que antes, que he presentado. Estos son los últimos 5 años en servicios clínicos, y esto es a nivel de programa, es decir, esto excluyendo, a nivel de programa de Barcelona, excluyendo servicios clínicos y ETODA. ETODA es el equipo ambulatorio de servicios clínicos. Estas son las características. Aquí básicamente es como dejar sobre la mesa que servicios clínicos actúa como punto de contingencia. Es decir, las prevalencias de factores de riesgo comentados anteriormente son mucho más elevadas, como era de esperar. Esto es una pura evidencia. Ahora, ¿qué pasa? Cuando analizamos estas características y cómo a nivel de programa afectan al resultado del tratamiento de los pacientes, vemos que sobre todo la precariedad social se encuentra asociada significativamente a resultados de pérdida y de muerte. Es decir, las personas con precariedad social se pierden más y se mueren más. Esto incluye también la edad y el alcohol dentro de los éxitos, pero principalmente la característica más relevante es precariedad social. Y relevante porque a nivel de Catalunya la precariedad social sigue en alza. En 2020, el último informe completo de tuberculosis de Catalunya mostraba esta gráfica tan interesante que ves, un 30%, casi una tercera parte de las personas con tuberculosis en Catalunya presentaban precariedad social. Entonces, esta característica en un tercio de la población con tuberculosis que tenga un riesgo más elevado de perderse y de morirse, para mí hace muy evidente la necesidad de un centro como servicios clínicos, que da un soporte a este tipo de personas y consigue unos resultados sin riesgo de pérdida y sin riesgo de muerte. Entonces, lo que quiero también comentar es, con esta imagen que creo que no se entiende muy bien cuando la presenté, pero básicamente servicios clínicos, que es esta bolita de aquí, lo que quiero retransmitir es que es una pieza dentro de un programa, no es el santo grial, no es la única solución, y no quiero transmitir con esta presentación de que la tuberculosis en Cataluña se desmoronaría si no existiera este centro, sino que creo que está muy especializado en lo que hace, es muy bueno en lo que hace y es necesario a nivel de los resultados que consigue son muy buenos y a nivel de programa es una pieza clave que puede ayudar mucho en un aspecto concreto, en su especialidad. Entonces forma parte de un conjunto de cosas, forma parte de un engranaje que permite ir luchando contra la tuberculosis desde distintos frentes. Y es un punto de la complejidad, como he dicho al principio, tanto clínica como social. Las personas dentro de servicios clínicos presentan dificultades sociales que van mucho más allá de conseguir la medicación o conseguir que el paciente se la quiera tomar o no. Es situaciones vitales que hacen muy difícil que el paciente pueda curarse correctamente y pueda recibir el tratamiento correctamente. Entonces, como punto de contingencia de la complejidad, servicios clínicos hace este papel que para mí, me parece que es muy, muy relevante. Y luego está, si os recordáis, el primer gráfico del mapa de Cataluña de las regiones sanitarias, donde comentaba que sobre todo recibe pacientes de Barcelona y Lérida. Hay un equipo, el ETODA, que es el equipo ambulatorio de servicios clínicos, que lo coloco aquí porque el conjunto de estos dos equipos, es decir, la clínica y el equipo ambulatorio, consigue un flujo mucho más orgánico desde los pacientes de otras regiones sanitarias al centro. Este binomio lo que consigue es, por eso, el flujo de pacientes es principalmente de Barcelona y de Lérida, porque es en esas regiones sanitarias donde actúa el equipo ambulatorio. Y por lo tanto, la incorporación de este servicio en distintas regiones sanitarias también podría ser un eje clave para el ingreso de pacientes en este centro. A la hora como he dicho, a la hora de tratar con características que para el programa son complejas, el centro no las presenta, estas complejidades, y aquí es donde entra el aumento de la expansión de servicios clínicos que ahora mismo está experimentando, que es algo que también es muy interesante. Servicios clínicos está creciendo, está aumentando, está ganando nuevas camas, está ganando nuevas experiencias y para poder ampliar el servicio a más gente con estas características. Básicamente, el perfil epidemiológico de la clínica, como comentaba, sigue presente en Barcelona. No es que todas las características estén en declive, sino que todavía hay características que se muestra con evidencia numérica de que tener servicios clínicos va a ser útil. Y básicamente vemos esto, como todos estos cambios se adapta, o sea, servicios clínicos se adapta a todos estos cambios. Entonces, a nivel de qué interés puede, esto es algo que me preguntaba al principio, que era qué interés puede tener este centro para alguien que sea de fuera de Cataluña o alguien fuera de España mismo, ¿no? Es un modelo bastante exclusivo, bastante único, y creo que puede ser interesante para zonas que estén con baja endemia, que tengan los pacientes remanentes o las personas enfermas remanentes sean de este tipo de perfil, y creo que es un modelo que funciona muy bien por la gran maniobrabilidad que tiene a la hora de tratar a cada paciente, y lo puede hacer muy específicamente para cada uno. Y entonces, es como una idea muy grande, pero que instar a las personas que sean de fuera, las que sean de Cataluña y que no lo conozcan, instarlas a comunicarse con servicios clínicos. Las que sean de fuera, crear un programa o alguna idea que sea parecida, que instarles a que busquen dentro de sus datos a ver si existen algún tipo de relaciones como las que he presentado aquí, y que presentar un modelo como este sería algo que creo que puede ser fructífero para otras zonas. Y nada, esto es todo. Gracias a todos.
Mario, quédate aquí. Si os parece, haremos ahora las preguntas, porque cada mesa o cada charla es diferente, y entonces haremos primero haremos las preguntas después de cada ponente.
Perfecto, sí. Sorry.
¿Alguna pregunta?
Darío.
Sí.
Mientras llega el micro, a nivel de otras autonomías, ¿no hay ningún centro parecido, Mario? Por lo que decías ahora.
Sí, no. El modelo de servicios clínicos no se encuentra en ninguna otra parte. Es bastante único por todas las... Existen modelos similares de TDO, como el equipo ambulatorio, existen en otras zonas, incluso aquí en Cataluña, pero que trate a los pacientes con este tipo de atención integral, que ataque desde distintos ángulos y que ayude al paciente como de manera integral, es exclusivo, sí.
Por tanto, en el momento actual, que está aumentando, como decías, la precariedad social, ¿qué crees que puede pasar en otras ciudades o comunidades autónomas que no disponen de un centro como este? Y ahora que estás en la India y comentabas que trabajarás en Nepal, para estos países donde la situación es terriblemente peor, ¿piensas que puede haber alguna solución innovatoria en este sentido? En
estos países, cuando miras las problemáticas principales, van bastante más allá de las que he presentado aquí. En países de alta endemia encuentras que la instalación, o sea, la presencia de un centro como servicios clínicos solucionaría muchas cosas solo por el hecho de existir, porque hay muchos problemas con, por ejemplo, transporte. Los pacientes no quieren hacer, cuando estás en la India ves que todo es mucho más grande allí y no quieres hacer 60 kilómetros una vez por semana solo para ir a por la medicación, y eso ya reduce drásticamente la adherencia. Hay problemáticas mucho más ligadas a la situación social de las personas y a su estado familiar o vital que supone un problema mucho más grande que, bueno, es que precariedad social allí es otra, se leería de otra manera, no como la leemos aquí, y creo que hay muchos más retos antes de implementar un centro como este, que creo que sería muy útil, pero creo que antes hay que conseguir la medicación necesaria, conseguir no sé, otras soluciones antes de...
Muy bien, queda claro, creo. Darío.
Sí. Darte la enhorabuena de esa explotación de datos, ¿no? En la época
Gracias.
que estamos viendo del Big Data, a veces con Intermediate Data, podríamos decir, también se puede sacar mucha observación, ¿no? Me ha encantado el análisis de componentes múltiples, en el que claramente veías esa transición a que lo que antes era diferente ahora no era tanto. Si no te he entendido mal, había un factor importante ahí de salud mental, que entiendo que si lo volvías a introducir en el modelo, esas elipses volvían a separarse, ¿es así?
Falta todo este análisis. Esto es algo muy reciente porque los datos solo los tenemos desde hace nada. La doctora Alter lo finalizó hace muy poco, pero realizando un análisis de supervivencia así rápido para ver las curvas, veíamos esta asociación de trastornos de salud mental. Falta un poco de rigor detrás todavía, hacer todo un análisis más. Esto lo he puesto como un dato interesante porque creo que se puede encontrar cosas que estén asociadas a la pérdida y que el hecho de que yo en la presentación diga que no hay ninguna de primeras no es que crea que no están, sino que todavía no las hemos encontrado y que lo que hay que hacer es buscar en otros territorios, en otros ámbitos, y trastornos de salud mental me parece que es algo muy, muy relevante, sobre todo en el tipo de perfil de pacientes que tenemos, porque tienen situaciones muy complejas. Tengo que incluirlo en el análisis de elipses, pero estoy seguro de que si se incluye, las elipses se separan. Seguro. Sí. No, a ti.
Vale, pues muchas gracias, Mario. No hay ninguna pregunta en el chat, o sea que damos paso a la siguiente ponente.
Vale, merci.
Vale, es la doctora Samiksha Ghimire, no sé si lo he dicho bien, farmacóloga clínica de la Universidad de Groningen, de los Países Bajos, y que nos hablará un poco de la utilidad del PKPD para monitorizar el tratamiento en la tuberculosis. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Hello, everybody. Today I will talk about therapeutic drug monitoring in the treatment of tuberculosis. So just to let you know, I'll try to talk about the role of pharmacokinetic and dynamic-based approach in TB treatment optimization. And throughout my talk, we will try to answer few clinical questions, such as, are the patient attaining adequate exposure on a standard prescribed regimen? If not, can we use therapeutic drug monitoring to find the right dose in individual patient? And is TDM feasible the way we use it? And if not, are there other alternative optimum sampling strategies that can make TDM feasible in settings where TB is endemic and which is mostly also resource limited? Then I will briefly talk about the role of quantitative drug susceptibility testing, because that's the PD component of the PK/PD part. And then I will show you one example of how this can be used in clinic, and then also talk about challenges and knowledge gaps. So once we have diagnosed a patient and selected a right drug, the optimization of antimicrobial therapy has two important pillars, so pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Pharmacokinetics talks about what happens to drug in the body, so it describes processes like absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. So in the lab, we look at Cmax, that's the maximum concentration, or Cmean, TRA levels, or area under the exposure over 24 hours. And the pharmacodynamic component tells us what does drug do to the body, so efficacy and also toxicity. If we link these two components, pharmacokinetic and dynamic, to the clinical effect, it guides individualized treatment in a particular patient. So depending on the property of the drugs, different drugs have different predictors for efficacy. For TB drugs, most of the key anti-TB drugs have AUC by MIC as the most best predictor of efficacy, so we'll focus mostly on that. Although it's a busy slide, I want to show you, these are the drugs that we, key anti-TB drugs. This is the standard dose. These are the levels that we want to achieve. These are the targets, and there is a number to it. You also see that I have not included drugs like bedaquiline, delamanid, and proteomanid because we don't have so much PK/PD information on these drugs yet. So we do know the Cmax or what we should achieve, but we don't know the target. So this is just for you to remember and to take home that different drugs are being administered at one standard dose based on weight band dosing, and they have one target or multiple targets depending on if you are looking at AUC or MIC or a ratio that we want to achieve. So to convince you, let's go through these slides. First of all, are patients attaining adequate exposure on a standardized regimen that's being used in most of the TB centers across the world, except few. And we know by now that it doesn't, because each patient is different with different patient characteristics, so it's simply not enough. I will show some examples. When we studied 55 patients receiving standard isoniazid dosing, you can see there was a difference in there was an 18-fold difference in between the range that we observe in the patient. Similarly, same with rifampicin. And these variabilities does explain why some patients respond to the treatment while others fail the treatment. So I just lost. So similarly with levofloxacin, this was the study that was done among multi-drug resistant TB patients in Nepal, receiving 750 to 100 milligram with weight banding at 50 kilogram. And you can see that at each concentration, it's widely variable. And the thing is that key drugs like levofloxacin, linezolid, these are the most successful repurposed drugs. And there is also a risk of acquired drug resistance because of the subtherapeutic concentrations in some, and then other patients are above. Another study by Peloquin and colleagues showed that this was a dose-ranging trial where, just like following the path of rifampicin, they also studied what happens with higher dosing of levofloxacin, and can we find a right target in clinical patients. So what you see in this study is that there was a huge overlap towards the standard doses, and with increased dosing, the exposure did increase. But their treatment outcome studies have shown that levofloxacin is enough at the dosing that we are currently using, because the increased AUC by MIC did not result in better treatment outcomes or early sputum culture conversion. Similarly, with linezolid, another important drug, but also has a narrow therapeutic index. It's toxic. So its semen is associated with the hematotoxicity that we see and the mitochondrial toxicity. So there is always a challenge to make sure that patient is having a right dose and not experiencing or has an acceptable toxic effects. But this was another study that was also done in South Africa, where you can see the concentration of linezolid in patients vary greatly. This is the median for 600 milligram once daily, and this was for the 300 milligram. And yet, you see that in this 600 milligram dosing, 58% of the patient had semen above 2 milligram per liter, which is now clearly associated to increase the risk of toxicity. So I hope by now I convince you that these TB drugs are highly variable, and just to maintain the efficacy while minimizing the toxicity, TDM is needed. Huge progress has been made lately, past 10 years. American Thoracic Guideline has suggested TDM for patients receiving linezolid and cycloserine. WHO also now recommends TDM for patients receiving fluoroquinolone and linezolid. But I think there are other patient groups which are at least equally eligible to receive therapeutic drug monitoring. So these are patients with severe gastrointestinal problems, diabetes mellitus, HIV, kidney problems, poor treatment response, malnutrition, pregnancy, and pediatric patients. So what do we do then? Conventionally, TDM was more simple. We collected one blood drug level after 7 days when a patient was on steady state, looked at that drug level, compared it with the Cmax or Cmean range that was established, and based on the nomogram, we increased or decreased the dose. But now, because of the advancement in model-informed precision dosing, we have really made a lot of progress where you can actually predict, put prior information about the patient's characteristics and covariates in a model that is developed and validated using a patient population with a similar characteristics. So here, then the model performs simulation and suggests upcoming doses, and also gives you an idea of AUC that the patient is going to achieve. So this is the example of linezolid that we do at our treatment center. So when a patient arrives, after 7 days, we measure the drug level, and then we calculate the AUC. The program calculates the AUC for us, so we just put the patient characteristics in there, and then it recommends what could be the next best dosing and what would it translate into in terms of AUC. So the question is that to be able to do that, we really need expensive equipments and expertise, which is often not feasible in settings where TB is endemic. So, for instance, TDM using blood samples require liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry, which is a highly sophisticated equipment. Also the knowledge of model-informed precision dosing, and then the data also requires clinical interpretation. So once we have a plasma level of a certain drug, what does it mean clinically? So this expertise might be lacking in the area that we are really interested in treating TB, where the burden is high. So traditionally, we collected around 8 to 10 sampling time points to measure the AUC, which is burdening. And now with the advancement of optimal sampling time points, what I mean by that is that instead of 8 to 12 time points, you can use 3 sampling time points, which can be done during the time patient is in the clinic. And these time points are validated and are able to accurately also predict the AUC. So that's one solution. The other solution is it reduces sampling burden. And then the other step is that where do we analyze these drug levels? So do they have a lab capable of performing LC-MS, MS? And And that's the risk with blood sampling, really, because of its stability issues and transportation issues, which for drugs like isoniazid and rifampicin need to be transported minus 80 degrees. So then we looked further into, are there other alternative sampling strategies? We now know the time point, but are there other ways so that they can outsource the analysis to the reference laboratories? Then we researched into other matrices like dried blood spot sampling, oral fluids, urine. We have some data on dried blood spot sampling and oral fluid for TB drugs. Briefly, these are non-conventional matrices or non-conventional way of sampling. Sampling conventional matrices, which overcomes the problems associated with blood sampling. So what's a dry blood spot? It's a collection tool that uses finger prick blood. Users need a lancet, prick a finger, and the blood drops on the DBS card. The advantage of this is that drugs are more stable in a blood when it's dried in the DBS card, and the stability, for example, for rifampicin at 25 degrees is for 2 months, which also means that for TB endemic settings, they can simply ship it to the reference laboratories to be analyzed, and it does not need special shipping conditions. So DBS has been studied for multiple anti-TB drugs, and I will show you the results. The other matrix that we studied was saliva. Obviously, saliva has more challenges compared to dried blood spot, because when we are treating a TB, it's present at the target site. So using blood already introduces one level of variability. So if you add saliva, that adds to another level of variability. So our studies found that the PK of drugs are more complex in saliva because of passive diffusion. It is dependent on the pK of a drug, and that the role of saliva would be rather limited to more a semi-quantitative testing, where at a community level or intermediate level of TB care, that we can orally identify patients that are at a risk of low drug exposure versus high drug or adequate drug exposure. But the good news is that DBS really seems to be a game-changing alternative matrix, and we have been using it in our clinic. Bias and imprecision is within the acceptable limits of EMA guideline. Rifampicin, there was a very good correlation, and we are already performing several clinical studies where, for instance, from Paraguay, we are using DBS instead of plasma samples to estimate the drug levels for a high-dose rifampicin study. So it does work for rifampicin, pyrazinamide, moxi, and linezolid. For isoniazid, it was unclear because isoniazid has a stability issue. Ethambutol was not feasible because of high imprecision. So in conclusion, dry blood spot sampling can replace conventional plasma or serum sampling in settings where it's not feasible. So I won't go into detail in this one because previous speaker really clearly explained the role of phenotypic susceptibility testing, genotypic, the challenges with correlation between the two methods. But this is a very important part because the AUC by MIC part of the MIC comes from here. We have been measuring MIC with different methods, solid or liquid method, but the issue is that depending on the method and then depending on the lab, MIC can be one dilution either direction, so it could be, if you repeat on the same isolates, it can be 0.5 one time, and other time it could be 1 milligram per liter. And if you are combining the ratio, that has a big implication on the dose adjustment, because maybe with 0.5, you still achieve the target, but when the denominator is increased, you need higher doses. So, and a lot of advancement, again, in genotypic testing with the availability now of whole genome sequencing is exploring a lot on microevolution of resistance, and if we can link these mutations to drug dosing or drug AUC, but we still have a long way to go. So this I will try to summarize everything I spoke today in this slide. So how could we integrate both of these approaches to move towards more precision medicine? If MDR TB patient or a case is confirmed, I come from Nepal, and Nepal already uses line probe assay to identify these patients if they are at risk for moxi or fluoroquinolone resistance. So that's the first step. Now patients are already receiving catered treatment on that regard. But once we include them for fluoroquinolones, then we recommend first TDM in 7 days, because you need to reach a steady state level. The sample can be collected either using plasma or serum or dry blood spot in central laboratories of developing countries. Most of them don't have LC-MS, MS yet, so they could collect the samples and ship it to the centers where it's possible. And as a reference laboratory, we will strive to give results within 7 days and communicate via telemedicine with the clinicians present in the local site. And the idea is we have a developed target, which are mostly from preclinical model and like in vitro hollow fiber model or mice models, which has already been also very clearly explained by a previous speaker. We could use that to see how is the patient doing. The target for MOXIE is 110, so you can see if the AUC is 55, and we can say what is the population MIC in our area for this patient, and can we use that before we have an actual MIC value available, because the culture takes time. And then once the actual MIC is available, then you can get the ratio and try to hit this target. Let's say, for example, for MOXIE, if 400 was not enough, you could consider increasing it to 600 while monitoring the QT interval in this patient. The good news in the drug susceptibility testing is that line probe assays have been implemented in the central level laboratories of developing countries, and they are using it already to identify patients to put them on an appropriate regimen. The thing that needs to be done is really to correlate these mutations and give us more informed knowledge on how we can utilize them. So what does it mean when there is a mutation on this segment? Although for fluoroquinolones it has been studied, and we know that there are low-level mutation, there are high-level mutation, and intermediate-level mutation. And if the mutation is low-level, you can still increase the dose and use the same drug. So you don't have to move to another drug. Same with isoniazid. We also know if it's a CAT-G mutation or INHA mutation, and that already guides if we can use this drug in patient or not. So we are moving forward. So TDM has been recommended in few guidelines already. With respect to dose optimization, although we don't have this validated target in patients, but there is a good correlation in what we are seeing in hollow fiber models and what we have been observing in patients. For isoniazid, there was an accuracy of 94%. And on the laboratory front, we have been successful in developing a single multi-analyte assay that could analyze both first and second line TB drugs in one run. So that also speeds up the process. We have been successful in studying the optimal sampling time points and limited sampling and alternative sampling matrices. But the challenge still is that TB with tuberculosis, first of all, we see the plasma level, and we are not treating the plasma concentration. We are treating a patient, and patient receives a combination regimen. So we really don't know if we attain this individual target, how do they react when they are being received a cocktail of drugs, and is there a synergistic effect or antagonistic effect? So that's something that still needs to be done, and we also need to validate these targets in patients and linking it to sputum conversion or culture conversion or outcome data, which has been done by Peloquin's group for levofloxacin. And as we discussed earlier, we also are in a need of biomarker that can guide us towards understanding if we are on a right path. So as I said, for new drugs like bedaquiline, delamanid, proteamanid, we lack the PK/PD, and it is worrying because these drugs also suffer from the same pharmacokinetic variability or drug-drug interaction or other properties, and we have already started to see the resistance to these drugs. So that's something that needs to be done still, and well-designed prospective study is lacking that compares standard care with the TDM-guided care. It is challenging because all of these drugs are out of patent, and there is a lack of funding on this topic, but also it's difficult to maintain the blinding and other aspects. And as I mentioned already, there is a limited knowledge about the validity of a PK target, and we don't know how it's working in a combination regimen, but the in vitro hollow fiber model studies have been encouraging on this front. So take-home message is that one size really does not fit all, and we would like to treat each patient considering their covariate and unique patient characteristics and adjust the treatment. Therapeutic drug monitoring has a huge role in helping this regimen survive, basically. In resource-scarce settings, we have some solid alternatives to make TDM feasible. And TDM is especially powerful when combined to drug susceptibility testing, so this duo needs to be further studied. And my acknowledgements to my colleagues at the lab of the Department of Clinical Pharmacy and Pharmacology and TB treatment centers in the Netherlands. And I thank you for your attention. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Thank you very much. El micro, tenemos varias por aquí.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I was wondering what your experience with TDM for TB meningitis is, because obviously the penetration of drugs into the central nervous system is very much dependent on how much inflammation there is in the meninges. So do you measure, do you do TDM on liquor as well? And what is your experience in a clinical setting?
Yeah, absolutely, and very good point, because indeed we sometimes struggle with the penetration of these drugs in the cerebrospinal fluid, and as you mentioned, depending on the severity. And again, as I mentioned before, mentioning these drugs in CSF introduces another level of variability. So we do try to monitor in this patient and try to maintain the dose while being cautious about the toxicity, but we are not as certain as we would be in the blood levels.
Yeah. Many thanks. May I continue? Yeah. Andriy Dudnik, pneumologist from Ukraine. Many thanks for highlighting this interesting topic. My question is regarding last slides, last part of your presentation. If I understand correctly, at the moment it's quite difficult to make any conclusion in patient taking multiple medicines. For example, patients under anti-tuberculosis treatment together with antiretroviral therapy and taking methadone and, for example, fluconazole also. So is it true that at the moment using this algorithm for therapeutic drug monitoring, you cannot make any clear conclusion in this kind of situation just to decrease anti-TB medicines concentration or increase them instead of removing or adjusting dosage of another medicine, for example, antiretroviral therapy or any other anti-diabetic medicines or something like that?
Yeah, so I would like to answer this question by saying perfection is the enemy of good, and we know that these antibiotics behave in a very variable way, and as you just mentioned, when HIV medication is present, they influence the concentration of each other. So what I do recommend is still go for individual dose optimization and then see where we get and monitor toxicity, then doing nothing at all, because that clearly doesn't work either, and wait for these studies hopefully in future. But in our center in Netherlands, we do monitor each of these drugs individually. For example, we had one patient who was COVID lung transplantation and was receiving tacrolimus, developed TB during the course of treatment and was receiving fluconazole. So pharmacokinetically, everything is happening in this patient, and we did try to adjust each of these 3 drugs separately and come together as a multidisciplinary team and bring our knowledge. I think we do have enough evidences by now to move towards TDM and adjust the dose, while being cautious that we still don't know other aspects of it.
Dr. Cardona, here.
Thank you very much. This is a really great talk. The thing is, don't you think that when we are looking for new treatments, we don't take into account any of these ideas? Because they say, like, well, we are going to give it for 12 months, for 6 months, for 4 months. But apparently there is no link to this PK/PD concept. This is one thing. The other thing is that when you look for MIC in MTB, it's not like in E. coli. You don't know exactly if you are bactericidal or not. And the other point is that the bacteria itself is very slow. So you don't know exactly what the drug does in the bacteria, how it interferes with the metabolism. This is another difficulty. And the other one that I asked to another colleague of yours is when you look at this data, you never look at the concentration of the bacilli, because then it can change in a way how you adjust the dose. Because when we do the MIC, we do always in looking for exactly concentration of bacteria that maybe is not the case in each patient. So how you deal with? Have you tried to make a sort of big data modeling in trying to put all these sort of variables? I don't know if it, or even to look, for instance, to include the RNA expression transcriptomics when you look at the effect of the drug in the bacilli, to try to discern this PKs, so this time lapse, how interferes. There are some different ideas, but I'm fascinated by these models in which I usually ask for the same thing. But in the case of TB especially, so for instance, when you do a pneumonia for pneumococcus, 3-4 days is fantastic, all is very quick. But here we are talking about months, we are talking about different tissues, we are talking about even different speeds of growth of the bacilli regarding on if there is inflammation or not, or if there is necrosis or not. And the bacilli itself is also very low. It's very slow growing. It has very slow metabolism, and also there is the problem of the bacillary load that also may change all these variables.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think this is one of the reasons why TB bacteria has been so successful. It has evolved together with us, and we are still battling it. About your first point on the new drugs, and the whole PK/PD part is relatively new, and the first study on in vitro hollow fiber model came in 2004. But new studies and clinical trial are incorporating PK/PD element to their equation. Also, the whole genome sequencing technique is rather new. So there are some good news there. About your second point on the MIC, I completely agree with you. There was a study by colleagues from South Africa, Data and colleagues, and they found that even within same patient, within the anatomical microcompartment, the MICs were different. So which MIC are we treating then, right? So that's another thing for our microbiologist in the room to find answer to, hopefully. And about your third point on the stages of MTB growth, and I really believe because of its persisting phase, and that certain drugs only target when it's highly metabolizing and then not slow metabolizing, that makes it difficult. But the good news is that combination regimens are coming and more powerful regimens are coming that we hope attacks this bacteria from all sides for a longer period of time.
We have time for only one question. Here, please. There.
A short question, please.
So yes, thank you very much for your talk. Just a practical question about the use of intravenous drugs for treating TB in severely ill patients or with problems of absorption, gastrointestinal absorption.
Could you repeat your question?
Intravenous use, the intravenous use of the drugs, the TB drugs.
Right. I think, yeah, actually.
Do you have any indication? Because we have, as Dr. Sanchez told before, we treat patients in a personal basis. So there are some patients that we think that they doesn't absorb because of gastrointestinal problems, diarrhea, or several wasting. So we use, in some cases, intravenous drugs. So what do you think about that?
I think that's ideal if you could do that to your patient, but it's often not feasible again because of the inconveniences of dosing, right? What we do in our clinic is that we first try to increase the dose with oral dosing because these patients need to go home with a certain regimen that they can take daily, and intravenous is ideal, but then they have to come to clinic every day, and are they able to do that, right, if you are treating this patient for long term? And that's the inconvenience of the IV, but pharmacokinetically, it's perfect.
The use will be just the 2 or 3 first weeks until the patient recovers enough.
Okay, and then how do you decide which dose to maintain? So you assume that then patient will absorb normally on the oral dosing?
Yeah, we switch to the fixed dose combination.
Right.
Adjusted by body weight.
Yeah. So I see the point in that because if patient is receiving other medicines or has diabetes mellitus, there is a value. But what I would recommend is that then it still needs to be tested when you start this patient on an oral dosing. How is the absorption going? Because even on our patients who we dose orally, it's always not the case, and we have to wait and increase the dose. So there are multiple things going on in this patient. So I recommend that please switch it to oral dosing and make sure that you have some kind of drug levels to assure that patient is being correctly dosed.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Debemos pasar a la última presentación. Es un placer para el Programa de Prevención y Control de la Tuberculosis de Barcelona y también para la Fundación de esta unidad de investigación en tuberculosis presentar al doctor Tom Frieden. Él participó en la primera reunión de estas jornadas, la primera edición hace ahora 27 años, cuando era director del programa Tuberculosis de Nueva York, y por aquellos años también nos asesoró para mejorar el control de la tuberculosis en esta ciudad de Barcelona. El doctor Tom Frieden es un médico formado en medicina interna, enfermedades infecciosas, epidemiología y salud pública. Fue director de los CDC y también fue comisionado del Departamento de Salud de la ciudad de Nueva York. En esta ciudad comenzó su carrera de salud pública liderando los esfuerzos que pusieron fin al mayor brote de tuberculosis multiresistente ocurrido en Estados Unidos. Luego fue asignado a la India, donde ayudó a ampliar un programa para el diagnóstico y tratamiento de la tuberculosis que salvó millones de vidas. Cuando se le pidió que regresara a la ciudad de Nueva York para convertirse en comisionado de salud, dirigió esfuerzos para reducir el tabaquismo y otras causas principales de muertes que aumentaron la esperanza de vida en 3 años. Como director del OCDC, el Dr. Frieden supervisó el trabajo que ayudó a poner fin a la epidemia de ébola en África Occidental en el 2014. Actualmente es presidente y director ejecutivo de Resolve to Save Life, Resolver para Salvar Vidas, que creó en 2017 y lidera los esfuerzos de esta organización para asociarse con países para prevenir 100 millones de muertes por enfermedades cardiovasculares y hacer que el mundo sea más seguro frente a las epidemias. Tom, es un placer tenerte otra vez aquí, aunque esta vez sea solo online. Muchas gracias y adelante con tu presentación.
Muchísimas gracias. Lo siento que no estamos juntos en Barcelona, pero estoy con ustedes en espíritu. Sorry, but I'll speak in English for the presentation, talking about the future of both tuberculosis control and global health. Despite being nearly 100% curable, tuberculosis remains a major public health threat and the world's leading cause of infectious disease death. And in fact, although cases and deaths have been declining, and more rapidly, especially among people living with HIV co-infection since the expansion of antiretroviral treatment, as we heard, for example, in the first presentation in this session, the world, even before the COVID pandemic, was not on track to meet most of the United Nations and WHO tuberculosis control targets. And what you see here within the red box is definitely an effect of COVID. But even before COVID, the rates were much, much higher than was the goal. In fact, we're far off track. If you look at the baseline of the Sustainable Development Goals, the estimate is about 127 per 100,000. And if you look at where we are now, somewhere around 107, 110, a little higher in this past year data just released because of really the catch-up from COVID, you have a pessimistic, an optimistic, and a business-as-usual scenario. But even the optimistic scenario misses the target by almost huge amount, from 25 to 75. So it's 3 times higher, even optimistically. So we're not achieving our ambitions. Now, as we all know, tuberculosis could eventually disappear on its own. And this is mathematics that Dr. Carol Stiblo drew for me on a napkin in a restaurant in New York City when I had just become tuberculosis control director in 1991. The estimate was simply, and of course, the kappa, the dispersion factor, is quite large. So this is quite an oversimplification. But the estimate is that the average patient will infect 15 other people if not treated, that 10% of those will themselves develop tuberculosis, but only half of those will be highly infectious. So the R0 or R0 is less than 1. And given this trajectory, tuberculosis would eventually disappear, but left to its own devices, that would take several hundred years if we don't first destroy our planet. The objective of tuberculosis control is to accelerate elimination. I will say that when Dr. Carol Stiblo described this for me and drew this out on a napkin, he commented almost with pathos in his voice, you see, the tuberculosis bacillus is doomed. But of course, HIV has changed all of that and resulted in a very substantial increase in tuberculosis cases. Also, a better understanding of kappa, the dispersion factor, indicates that a small proportion of cases account for most transmission. And I don't think we've really incorporated this concept into our control programs. There's a very elegant study from 60 years ago by Riley, where he created hermetically sealed chambers where they rotated over the course of several years tuberculosis patients in and exhausted all of the air through ducts into which they put guinea pigs, actual guinea pigs. And what they found was that very few patients accounted for the vast majority of the infections. Also, treatment, antiretroviral treatment for HIV, and a tremendous potential to identify those with latent infection at highest risk for progression, and effective short course preventive treatments really do open new possibilities. So a lot is changing in our knowledge and in our ability to understand and control tuberculosis. Vaccines could be a game changer. It would be one of the greatest achievements in medical science, certainly worthy of a Nobel Prize, would save millions of lives. It's technically difficult, and the trials are methodologically challenging, and there's been slow progress, in part because pharmaceutical companies don't consider these vaccines to have high profit potential. That's a real problem, because it holds hostage the lives of millions of people to the profits of a small number of people. For public goods such as vaccines, there may be an important role for either public production or publicly funded research and publicly funded production. The current situation in which the industry profits from government research is neither responsible nor ethical. There are three fundamental principles of tuberculosis control, as I think you all know: prompt and accurate diagnosis, effective treatment begun immediately upon diagnosis and monitored until completion, and the interruption of transmission. The greatest risk of tuberculosis control is lack of implementation of effective and currently available strategies and tools. Tuberculosis control is fundamentally a management challenge. And to manage effectively, we have to treat the patients as the VIPs. TB control must be patient-centric, as we heard in the first presentation. Failure to bring treatment directly to patients at no cost, with no barriers, results in many patients being lost to treatment. This allows their disease to become worse, spread to others, and to become drug-resistant. We have to hold the healthcare and public health systems accountable for every patient's outcome. And having now run two large public health entities, the New York City Health Department and the CDC, my opinion is that the information system that Carol Stevlow created and WHO recommended for tuberculosis is the best of all public health information systems and a model for other programs. In fact, it's now been replicated in part or adapted to the treatment of hypertension, which is the world's #1 cause of death. And using data, including modern informatics systems, to improve performance, and really cutting-edge work like the therapeutic drug monitoring, which we just heard about. Forgetting is the key challenge in tuberculosis control. Political leaders forget the poor and the disenfranchised, who are most likely to contract and to die from tuberculosis. Health leaders forget simple, low-technology interventions and therefore neglect the work of treatment observation, field supervision, and cohort monitoring and evaluation. And of course, patients, when they feel better, naturally forget how sick they were and may stop medications. The hallmark of tuberculosis is persistence. Persistence of the bacillus for life in most infected people, and persistence of reproducing bacilli during the initial weeks of treatment. Fighting TB is hard work that does not end. The biggest need is energy and persistence in patients as well as in programs. Patients may stop treatment. Programs are tempted to alter what works. Doctors are tempted to fiddle with the regimen, changing things when it's just a matter of staying the course until the patient improves. Lack of persistence will increase the risk of relapse, development of drug resistance, and the recurrence of tuberculosis. Persistence is needed also to maintain the political will to support control services. Now, coming out of the acute phase of the worst pandemic in a century, with the exception actually of HIV, which has killed more people than COVID, to prevent the next pandemic, I would say we have to get the 3 R's right. A renaissance in public health to find and stop health threats quickly, robust primary health care at the center of our systems so that health is preserved and we detect and respond effectively, and resilient individuals and communities. A renaissance means that public health is aligned across local, city, state, national, and global levels, that within each country and area, it's aligned with political leaders so that evidence-based action is prioritized and there can be multi-sectoral collaboration and coordination with economic, educational, and social entities. In public health, we have to regain or strengthen some of the public trust that we lost during the pandemic. We need to get better data, real-time data, to enable the best quality decisions. And public health has to be staffed by experienced, practical experts to ensure that when there are more resources available, they're implemented effectively. Now, my organization, Resolve to Save Lives, suggested a target called 717, that every suspected outbreak would be identified within 7 days, reported in 1 day, and an effective response mounted in 7 days. That's going to cost money, but also need technical partnerships and stronger organizations around the world. Robust primary health care has to be central to our health system, and to be frank, for 50 years, we've been advocating for robust primary health care, and for most countries in the world, it is still something that is present in rhetoric, in words, rather than in reality. I can tell you in the United States, we certainly have a very poor primary healthcare system that is nowhere near the center of our system. But robust primary healthcare is also critical to improving our ability to quickly detect and completely treat both tuberculosis disease and latent tuberculosis infection. That means accountable systems, well-paid staff, patient-centered care, and finally, resilient individuals and communities to end the tobacco epidemic, which is possible, to protect people from unhealthy food and promote wholesome, low-sodium, sustainable, farmer-supportive food production and distribution, to promote healthy physical activity, including community redesign to promote walking and cycling, to reduce air and water pollution, to reduce harmful alcohol use by following evidence-based policies, and to protect the next generation, our children, from addiction to tobacco, alcohol, and drugs, as well as from predatory marketing from junk food companies. We should imagine and create a world where every child reaches adulthood without any addictions and able to meet and achieve their full potential. To achieve these, we need a very important triad we call TOP: technical, operational, and political. All are essential for tuberculosis control and for health progress more generally. Technical rigor, the right treatment, the right doses, the right monitoring. Operational excellence, above all, a management program tracking the outcome of every single patient. And political support and action for funding, accountability, applying the evidence base. And that's the triad that we focus on with simplicity, speed, and scale at Resolve to Save Lives. We have a series of programs. We're honored to partner with countries around the world. In the treatment space, we work in epidemic detection and control, partnering with countries in Africa. And in the non-communicable disease space, we work on hypertension prevention through reduced sodium and control through improved treatment of high blood pressure. High blood pressure kills more than 10 million people every year. It's the world's leading cause of death, and yet receives less than 1% of all of the global development dollars and global health dollars. So we're honored to be able to partner with different groups, and I'm honored to be here with you, and at least virtually, and I hope before too long in Barcelona again. So muchísimas gracias.
Many thanks. Muchas gracias. Doctor Frieden nos comentó que se podía hacer preguntas en español, en inglés también. Por tanto, rogamos preguntas y respuestas cortas. Mientras tanto, quizá nos impactó mucho aquí que conseguisteis que en Nueva York la tuberculosis fuera prioritaria, ¿no? Con un presupuesto realmente nos impactó muchísimo, como digo, de como 40 millones de dólares anuales, 40 millones, y trabajando solo en el programa en salud pública, casi 1.000 personas para 3.000 casos de tuberculosis, ¿no? Aquí la lástima es que la tuberculosis no es prioritaria, pero en el momento actual, ¿qué podría recomendar para países como España para que la tuberculosis fuera a nivel político fuera prioritaria?
Yeah, this is a big challenge, right? Certain things in public health are indicators of good governance. And I think on the one hand, we need to make very responsible use of all of the funds that are available to us. And also we need to make visible that which is invisible. Need to make visible what could happen with additional dollars. What would be the value of it? In public health, I feel often we're like Cassandra. Remember the curse of Cassandra. She could see the future, but no one would believe her. And so they didn't change they didn't follow her advice to avoid the death and devastation that would happen. And to break that Cassandra curse, we have to make visible what's invisible, show people those future cases that are going to happen if we don't implement. We also have to help people believe that what they may think is inevitable, tuberculosis will always be here, isn't, that we can actually stop it. And then we have to work together to create a healthier future. So I think it's partly a question of making sure we're using our own resources quite well and demonstrating that, and then outlining very clearly what more can be done. I think it's very challenging, as indicated by the epidemiology in countries like Spain. An increasing proportion of cases arise from immigrant populations, and of course there's a strong anti-immigrant feeling that we don't want to feed into. Rather, we should be saying, for the countries that are accounting for most of our cases, could we, in solidarity, work with them to reduce their incidence that would also protect us?
Muy bien. Si hay preguntas. ¿Hay alguna pregunta?
No. ¿Alguien del chat quiere hacer alguna pregunta?
En el último informe anual de la OMS, el declive que ha habido entre el 2015 y el 2022 era solo, creo, del 8-9%, ¿no? Es un declive muy lento. Entonces, ¿cómo ves el futuro de la tuberculosis en los próximos años?
I think, I go back to Stiglo. In the absence of HIV, the model is probably correct. That if we were to be able to successfully treat the vast majority of patients, we should be able to cut incidence in half in about 7 to 10 years. But we're not seeing anything like that decline. And partly that's because with HIV, we have a huge challenge. But even in non-HIV, we're not seeing that kind of decline. And that's because we have lost so many patients that don't start treatment. We're missing, maybe 30-40% of all patients, and they're continuing to spread tuberculosis. So unless we get a much higher detection rate, and that means better primary health care, better laboratory systems, better contact tracing and tracking to find people, we're not going to see that kind of a decline. Now, there have been bold calls for elimination, but it's hard for me to understand what is the technical package that will achieve that elimination. And when I asked somebody high up at WHO, they answered, well, we're assuming there will be an effective vaccine. I don't think we can assume that. We can hope for it, but we can't assume it. So unfortunately, I think with tuberculosis, it's really a question of persisting. And unless we see much better treatment, we're not going to see big declines. One additional technological breakthrough that I think would be enormously important is if we could predict which of the tuberculin positive or infected people, quantiferon, whatever tool, are most likely to progress. It's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 progresses. We know HIV, but in the non-HIV population, if we could predict that, then it would be possible to aggressively treat those individuals and dramatically reduce tuberculosis. But I see more commitment on the part of many countries to investing in tuberculosis control, but we have to persist. We have to be realistic about what can be accomplished. And we have to look for innovations for what more we can do. And one of the things that many different parts of the public health world are recognizing is without this essential leg of effective primary health care, it's very difficult to achieve the results we want to achieve. That's true for immunization programs. That's true for maternal and child health. It's true for tuberculosis and HIV and malaria. And I think for many, many years, there's been lip service to improving primary health care, but we haven't seen, except in a small handful of countries in the lower income group, we haven't seen that kind of progress. And I hope perhaps that can change in the coming years. And that would have an indirect but very powerful impact on reducing tuberculosis.
Dr. Cardona.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting talk, but I didn't see. I think this is a really powerful, a key factor in your how to say in your predictions, which is that probably Strilo could not also imagine, which is the dramatic increase in the population, in the planet population, together with the reduction of the impact of the climate change, which make the different areas of the planet less and less available for a human life. And the increase on the density, the increase of the population in the big cities, which is increasing faster and faster, which is, I think, now the half of the population is living in the big cities. So how you think you can deal with that?
Yeah, so first of all, urbanization is a factor because of population density. And as you say, a few years ago, we passed a milestone that more than half of the world's population lives in urban areas. I think in urban areas where there is tuberculosis, there's a role for specialized tuberculosis clinics, in addition to improved primary health care. Tuberculosis clinics don't forget about the disease. They provide good quality care. They can provide extensive social services. They can connect with public health for contact tracing and other measures. So I think urban health is an area that has been under-addressed, especially in lower income countries where urban aggregations are increasing rapidly and without access to health, social, or environmental services. Climate change is an existential threat for humanity. We're seeing the most pessimistic projections turn out to have been too optimistic in terms of the level of climate change. And we just are not well structured as a species to respond well to threats that we can't see right in front of us. And unfortunately, we really need much more global collaboration and global action to arrest climate change. And as you indicate, as more areas of the world become uninhabitable or not comfortably inhabitable, the likelihood is that there will be increased crowding, and increased crowding does increase tuberculosis risk. I think those risks can be mitigated, but the bigger issue doesn't have anything to do with tuberculosis. It has to do with the many devastating health, social, political, economic, and environmental impacts of climate change. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
Última pregunta. No more questions. Many thanks. Excuse me. The last question.
Hi, I'm Juan Espinosa from Valdebron Hospital here in Barcelona. Thank you for your talk, and it was really inspiring. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, no, that there's a small population that maintains transmission of the disease, and sometimes we can identify them, but sometimes they are difficult to track. So, for example, we know that there's prisoners, there's people who goes into prison, they take tuberculosis there, but you don't know what happens to them when they go out, TB. There are nomads, ethnic groups. In Barcelona, we have a lot of tuberculosis incidents in homeless people. So do you think that there will be new tools to track these kind of difficult to reach populations and to bring treatment to them, to cut the pool of population that's maintaining transmission?
One of them, I want to make clear what the studies show about kappa, or the dispersion factor, which is that it's quite surprising. If you take 20 patients with heavily seropositive cavitary tuberculosis, many of them will transmit to nobody, or maybe one or two people. But a couple of them may transmit to many, many people. And we don't understand why that is. Is it because of the organism? Is it because of the pathophysiology of that individual? Is it because of the environment they're in, singing in a choir or in a poorly ventilated indoor space? Is it all of those things, or sometimes one or sometimes the other? So the first point is, someone who you may think is spreading tuberculosis may not be. That's a separate question of ensuring complete treatment for every patient. And obviously shorter regimens are helpful. Services like the one we heard about in the first presentation are very important for selected patients at high risk. And ultimately, perhaps the most important thing is a human bond that is developed between the clinical and public health carers for the patient, the outreach workers, and the patient. Because what tuberculosis does ultimately is it separates someone. We say we put someone in isolation, but actually tuberculosis itself puts people in isolation. So tuberculosis patients feel the rejection, isolation, alienation, and a good tuberculosis control program reaches out and creates a human bond with each patient so that they can help them get the social services that they need, so that they're trusted. I'll end with one story. Joan mentioned our program in New York City. Yes, it was large, but we were dealing with a very large outbreak that we were able to reverse. We had hundreds and hundreds of cases of what would now be called extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis. One of them was in an adolescent who had been incarcerated and had escaped from his incarceration. He had multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis. He was homeless and mentally ill, and he was being sought by law enforcement because he had escaped. He had been arrested and escaped. Our outreach worker found him and was able to get him his treatment, even in that extraordinarily difficult situation. Now, we were able to work with law enforcement to get him into a better situation, but to me that really brought home what a great tuberculosis program does. A great tuberculosis program not only is very sound technically, not only innovates and finds new things to do, not only is accountable for its outcomes and provides that information, but fundamentally is committed to supporting every tuberculosis patient through their successful treatment. Thank you very much. It's great to be with you again.
Many thanks, Dr. Frieden, next year in Barcelona.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos, muchas gracias a los tres ponentes. Os recordamos que la comida es ahora en la 4ª planta, tenéis que entregar el ticket y nos vemos aquí a las 4:05. Puntuales.